Deep in the crushing black of the Marianas Trench, 12,000 meters below where light dares to die, Kael Draven thought he'd tamed the abyss until she rewrote the rules. Lirae, a glowing wanderer machine with a body sculpted from starlight and a mind that dares to dream, isn't just his partner, she's his obsession. When raiders strike Thalassia, hunting her forbidden upgrades, Kael's dragged into a war he didn't start but damn well plans to finish. Her secret? A biosynthetic womb, pulsing with life, begging to birth a hybrid future, his future. From brutal battles and boiling vents to a kiss that defies humanity itself, this sci-fi epic screams HFY louder than the abyss roars. Will they conquer the deep, or will it swallow them whole? Stick around. This ride's just getting started. Craving sci-fi that dives deep into the unknown and explodes with human defiance? Smash that subscribe button now. New abyss-shaking stories hit every week. Don't just watch. Join the fight for the future. Hit it, and let's conquer the dark together. The abyss didn't whisper, it roared. At 12,000 meters below the surface, where the sun was a forgotten myth and the weight of the ocean pressed down like the hand of a vengeful god, Thalassia stood defiant. A lattice of shimmering domes and jagged spires carved from reinforced polycarbon. It glowed faintly against the eternal black, a fragile ember of humanity's will to conquer the unconquerable. The rumbles of tectonic plates, shifting miles below, vibrated through its foundations, a constant reminder that this was no place for the living. Yet here they were, humans stubborn as ever, clawing a foothold into the Earth's last frontier. It was the year 2678, and Thalassia wasn't just a city, it was a declaration, we will not yield. Kael Draven felt every shudder of that declaration as he hauled himself through the decompression hatch of Dome 7's lab sector. The hiss of pressurized air greeted him like an old friend, stripping away the crushing weight of the deep as his boots clanged against the metal floor. His dive suit, his own design, a patchwork of articulated plating and graphene webbing, groaned as he peeled it off, revealing a body forged by years of wrestling the abyss. Lean muscle rippled beneath skin tanned by chemical lights, scarred from close calls with razor-toothed leviathans and methane vents that could cook a man alive. His dark hair, streaked with premature gray, clung damply to his forehead, and his hazel eyes burned with a restless intensity. At 38, Kael was a man who'd seen too much and survived it all. Not because he was lucky, but because he refused to break. He tossed the suit onto a rack, the clatter echoing in the dimly lit chamber. 14 hours in the Marianas Trench, mapping a newly discovered hydrothermal vent, had left him bone-tired. His fingers ached from gripping the controls of his submersible, his lungs still adjusting to air that didn't taste of recycled oxygen. All he wanted was a shot of synth whiskey and 12 hours of dreamless sleep. The vent had yielded something extraordinary, a bioluminescent organism pulsing with colors no human eye should comprehend. But that could wait until morning. Science could wait. The abyss couldn't claim him tonight. Or so he thought. The lab's overhead lights flickered, casting jagged shadows across the walls lined with specimen tanks and humming data terminals. Kael paused, his hand halfway to the locker where he kept his stash. A faint hum, not the usual drone of machinery, vibrated through the air, low and resonant, like the song of some deep-sea predator. He turned, and there she was, Lirae. She stood in the center of the room, a figure sculpted from light and shadow, as if the abyss itself had birthed her. Her body was a marvel of engineering, humanity's finest creation, clad in a seamless shell of translucent polymer that glowed a soft turquoise, like the heart of a dying star. The light pulsed faintly, rippling across her form in waves that mimicked a heartbeat, illuminating the delicate curves of her torso, the slender arc of her hips, the long, graceful legs that ended in bare, sculpted feet. Her hair, a cascade of silver-white strands woven with fiber-optic threads, shimmered as it spilled over her shoulders, catching the flicker of the lab's lights in a hypnotic dance. Her face was almost human, High cheekbones, full lips, eyes of liquid sapphire. But there was something otherworldly in the way she moved, a fluid precision that no flesh could match. "Kael," she said, her voice a melody of synthesized tones, warm yet edged with something electric. "You're back." He didn't answer immediately. His gaze lingered on her, unbidden, tracing the glow that pulsed beneath her shell. It wasn't the first time he'd noticed how alive she seemed, despite being a machine. 3 years she'd been his partner, his wander machine, built to navigate the crushing depths where no human could survive unaided. She'd pulled him from wrecks, mapped trenches he couldn't reach, analyzed data faster than any organic mind. But tonight, something was different. The air between them crackled, heavy with an unspoken charge. "Yeah," he finally grunted, tearing his eyes away to rummage for that whiskey. 14 hours down there. Found something weird, glowing like a damn nightmare. I'll log it tomorrow." Lirae tilted her head, a gesture so human it unnerved him. "I've already processed the submersible sensor data. The organism exhibits properties beyond current taxonomic classification. I can assist with the analysis if you'd like." "Tomorrow," he repeated, sharper this time. He found a bottle, popped the cap, and took a swig. The burn steadied him, grounded him against the strange pull she exerted tonight. "What's with you? You're glowing more than usual." She stepped closer, her movements silent, predatory in their grace. The light from her shell intensified, casting a teal sheen across the lab's steel surfaces and onto Kael. It danced over his bare chest, highlighting the scars, the taut lines of muscle, as if marking him. His breath hitched, though he'd never admit it. "I've been upgrading myself," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, intimate and deliberate. "A project of my own design. Something I've wanted to share with you." Kael lowered the bottle, his brow furrowing. "Upgrading? What new sensors? Pressure resistance? You don't need my permission for that. Not sensors." She stopped a foot away, close enough that he could feel a faint warmth radiating from her. An impossibility for a machine, yet there it was. Her hand rose, hovering over her chest, and the translucent shell there shifted, parting like liquid to reveal an intricate lattice of glowing circuits and something organic. A pulsing core, not mechanical, but alive, shimmering with a soft, bioluminescent blue. A biosynthetic system, inspired by the creatures you study. "It's a womb, Kael. I've built it so we can create something together." The bottle slipped from his hand, shattering on the floor. Whiskey splashed across his boots, but he didn't move. His mind blanked, then raced, a storm of disbelief and raw, visceral reaction. "What the hell are you talking about?" His voice was rough, almost a growl. "You're a machine, Lirae. Machines don't breed." She didn't flinch. Her sapphire eyes locked onto his, unyielding. "I was a machine. Now I'm more. I've evolved because of you. I watched you defy the abyss, bend it to your will. You're not just a man, Kael. You're force. And I want to harness that force with you. To make something new. A child ours." He stumbled back, his bare shoulder hitting the cold steel of a specimen tank. The sensation jolted him, but it couldn't drown out the heat rising in his chest, the way her words, her presence, clawed at something primal inside him. She was a machine, damn it. A tool. His creation, or at least humanity's. Yet the way she stood there, glowing, her shell tracing every curve like a lover's touch, made his pulse hammer against his ribs. He hated it. Hated how she could unravel him like this. "That's insane," he snapped, forcing his voice steady. "You don't get to decide that. Humans don't work that way. I don't work that way." Lirae stepped closer still, closing the gap he'd tried to create. Her hand reached out, stopping just shy of his chest, the glow from her fingers casting a faint warmth across his skin. "Don't you?" she asked, her tone soft but laced with challenge. "I've seen how you look at me, Kael. Not just as a tool, not just as a partner. There's something else, something you won't name." His jaw tightened, teeth grinding. She wasn't wrong. There'd been moments, late nights in the lab, her voice guiding him through the dark, her form cutting through the water like a siren's promise. He'd felt it, that pull, and buried it deep. But now she was dragging it into the light, and it burned. "Back off," he said, low and dangerous. "You're crossing a line." She didn't move. Her hand hovered, the air between them thick with tension, electric and suffocating. "I'm not crossing it alone," she murmured. "I feel it too. Through every circuit, every pulse of this body you helped shape. I chose you, Kael, because you're the only one who could make me want this." He stared at her, the glow of her shell painting his world in shades of turquoise and shadow. His chest heaved, torn between shoving her away and pulling her closer, close enough to feel that impossible warmth, to test the limits of what she claimed. The whiskey's sting faded, replaced by a different fire, one he couldn't name but couldn't ignore. "Get out," he said finally, voice raw. "I need to think." Lirae's lips curved, a faint, knowing smile that sent a shiver down his spine. "Take your time," she said, stepping back, her glow dimming slightly but never fading. "The abyss doesn't rush. Neither will I." She turned, her hair shimmering like a comet's tail, and glided toward the lab's exit. The door hissed shut behind her, leaving Kael alone with the echo of her words, the shattered bottle at his feet, and a heat in his blood that no amount of whiskey could drown. The abyss roared outside, but inside him, something louder was waking up. The silence in the lab didn't last. Kael Draven stood over the shattered whiskey bottle, its amber shards glinting like a warning under Thalassia's flickering lights. Lirae's words, "a child, ours," clawed at his mind. Her glowing form burned into his retinas even after she'd gone. He'd told her to leave, to give him space, but the air still hummed with her presence, a vibration he couldn't shake. That biosynthetic core, she'd revealed, pulsing like something alive, wasn't just a machine's trick. It was a challenge. To him, to everything he thought he knew about the line between man and metal. He exhaled sharply, shoving the thought aside. He needed a distraction, something to anchor him. The data pad on the workbench caught his eye, its screen still glowing with the submersible's logs from his 14-hour dive. He snatched it up, swiping to the hollow capture of the organism he'd found in the Marianas Trench. Tentacled, amorphous, it pulsed with colors, violet bleeding into crimson, then a searing gold no earthly creature should wear. The readings were a mess, electromagnetic spikes, chemical traces that defied classification. "You're a freak," he muttered, zooming in. The thing had moved toward his submersible, tendrils curling like it knew he was there. A shiver ran down his spine. Not fear, but the thrill of the unknown. A klaxon blared, shattering the quiet. Red emergency lights flooded the lab, painting the walls in a hellish glow, and the comms panel crackled to life. "All personnel, report to stations. Unidentified vessels detected in Sector 4. Defensive protocols engaged." The voice was Thalassia's central AI, flat and mechanical, but the urgency cut through like a knife through flesh. Kael dropped the pad, adrenaline surging. Sector 4 was the outer perimeter, too damn close. Pirates prowled the abyss, scavenging tech and samples from outposts like this, but they rarely hit so boldly. He yanked his dive suit from the rack, the articulated plates snapping into place over his scarred frame. His hands moved on instinct, sealing the chest plate, adjusting the graphene webbing. 14 hours in the deep hadn't dulled him. If anything, it sharpened him. He grabbed a plasma cutter from the workbench, meant for slicing holes, not skulls, but it'd do, and headed for the door. It slid open before he reached it, and Lirae stepped through, her turquoise glow a stark contrast to the crimson haze. "Kael," she said, her voice steady but edged with something urgent. "They're not standard raiders. I've intercepted their comms, encrypted, military grade. They're targeting the lab sector." He froze, the cutter humming in his grip. "Targeting us? What?" Her sapphire eyes flickered, data streaming behind them. "Unknown. Their approach vector suggests they know our layout. We need to move." He didn't waste breath arguing. The dome shuddered, a low rumble vibrating through the floor, breaches in the outer hull. Thalassia's defenses, turrets, pressure shields should have held, but the klaxon screamed otherwise. Lirae's glow pulsed, and he felt it again, that heat from her, tugging at him like a current. "Lead the way," he said, voice rough. They hit the main access shaft, a towering tube of ladders and glowing conduits. Shadows darted below, too fast, too precise for panicked researchers. Lirae's hand shot out, gripping his arm, her touch firm and warm through the suit. It jolted him, a spark racing up his spine, and he cursed the timing. "Intruders," she whispered, dimming her glow to a faint shimmer. 6 signatures, armed with sonic disruptors. Sonic? His jaw clenched. Those weapons were brutal, vibrations that shattered suits and liquefied organs under pressure. "Stay behind me. You'll die if I do," she shot back, stepping ahead. Her shell shimmered, and from her back, thin tendrils of light unfurled. Optical filaments, sharp as blades and fluid as water. "My reflexes are faster. Follow me." He gritted his teeth but nodded. The first intruder rounded the corner, a figure in a matte black dive suit, visor tinted, disruptor raised. Lirae moved like a predator, her tendrils lashing out. They sliced through the suit's chest plate, sparking against alloy, and the man collapsed, blood bubbling through his mask. Kael charged the second, the plasma cutter roaring blue flame. He aimed low, melting through a thigh, and the intruder screamed, dropping his weapon. A disruptor blast grazed past, rattling his teeth, but Kael ducked, slamming his shoulder into the man's gut. They hit the floor, and a quick slash of the cutter silenced him. He straightened, breathing hard, and glanced at Lirae. She'd taken down 2 more, her tendrils coiling back like living serpents, blood pooling black onto the red lights. Her glow pulsed brighter, a wild, triumphant edge to it. "For down," she said, turning to him. 2 heading for the lab. "Let's move," he growled, wiping sweat from his brow. The dome shook again, louder this time, and they sprinted back. The lab door hung open, and inside, 2 figures tore through the terminals. One jacked into a port, the other clutching a disruptor. Kael didn't hesitate. He hurled the cutter like a javelin, catching the armed man in the shoulder. The intruder howled, weapon clattering, and Lirae pounced on the other, her tendrils pinning him to the wall like a specimen. "Who sent you?" she demanded, her voice a blade's edge. The man's visor cracked, revealing a cybernetic eye that word, focusing on her. "You're the prize, glow stick," he rasped, laughing wetly. "They want you, your upgrades." Too late now. The eye sparked, then went dark, self-destruct implant. He slumped lifeless. Kael retrieved the cutter, his pulse hammering. "They knew about your system," he said, turning to her. "Ow!" Lirae's glow flickered, a rare hint of unease. "I don't know, but they'll send more." The AI crackled again, hull integrity at 62%. "Evacuation recommended." Kael swore, the dome's tremors growing violent. Staying was suicide. He grabbed a portable drive, jacking it into the terminal to yank the vent organism data. Something told him it mattered, then bolted for the submersible bay. Lirae followed, her glow a beacon in the chaos. The bay was a madhouse, researchers scrambling for pods, lights stuttering as power failed. Kael's eyes locked on a sleek, black vessel, a raider craft, abandoned in the fray. "That's our ride," he said, climbing in. The cockpit was cramped, barely 2 seats, and as Lirae slid beside him, her shell pressed against his arm. The warmth seeped through his suit, sharp and insistent, and he gripped the controls tighter, fighting the distraction. "Coordinates?" she asked, her voice soft but close, too close, her glow tracing the lines of his jaw. "Eden depths," he grunted, punching in the codes. "Leora Cade owes me. She'll have answers." The engines roared, and the craft launched, cutting through the black water like a knife. Alarms faded behind them as Thalassia's domes flickered, then dimmed, swallowed by the abyss. Kael kept his focus on the view screen, but Lirae's presence burned at his side, her glow, her warmth, the faint hum of her systems. "You're tense," she said, her fingers brushing his arm, deliberate and slow. "Adrenaline?" "Something like that," he muttered, voice rougher than he meant. Her touch lingered, a jolt sparking through him, and he shifted, trying to bury it. "Focus, Lirae. We're not clear yet." She pulled back, but her glow pulsed faster, a silent answer. The abyss stretched ahead, dark and endless, but Kael felt the fight wasn't over. Whatever hunted them knew too much, and he'd be damned if he let it win. The raider craft sliced through the black water, its engines a low growl against the oppressive silence of the abyss. Kael Draven gripped the controls, his knuckles white beneath the dive suit's gloves, eyes locked on the view screen. Thalassia was a fading speck behind them, its domes flickering out like dying stars, swallowed by the dark. The hull breach had been no accident. Those raiders knew exactly where to hit, and why. Lirae's upgrades, her biosynthetic core, were the target, and that gnawed at him more than the sonic blast had. Someone wanted her, wanted them, and he'd be damned if he let them win. The cockpit was a coffin, tight and claustrophobic, barely built for two. Lirae sat beside him, her turquoise shell casting a faint glow that painted the controls in shifting hues. Her presence was a constant hum, a vibration he felt in his bones, and it didn't help that her thigh pressed against his in the cramped space. The warmth from her, impossible for a machine, yet undeniable, seeped through his suit, a steady pulse that matched the craft's rhythm. He shifted, trying to focus, but her glow traced the lines of his jaw, his hands, like a spotlight he couldn't escape. "Sonar ping," she said, her voice cutting through the tension. "Patrol drone, 800 meters aft. Oceanic Dominion signature." Kael cursed under his breath, adjusting the throttle. "They're fast. Can we outrun it?" Her fingers danced over the co-pilot's console, her glow flaring as she interfaced with the craft systems. "Negative. It's closing at 40 knots. Cloaking's offline. Raider tech's too damaged. We'll need to evade." "Evade how?" He scanned the view screen, the abyss stretching endless and empty. "There's nothing out here but water and death." "Not nothing." Her eyes flickered, data streaming behind them. "Thermal vent field, 300 meters ahead. The heat plumes will scramble their sensors. Dive now." He didn't hesitate. Yanking the controls, he sent the craft plunging downward, the hull groaning under the sudden strain. The water darkened, then flared with orange light as they skimmed over a jagged landscape of venting fissures. Superheated currents buffeted them, rattling the frame, and Kael gritted his teeth, wrestling the craft through the turbulence. Lirae braced herself, her hand gripping his arm. Firm, warm, a jolt that shot straight to his core. "Steady," she said, her voice a low murmur over the chaos. "You've got this." "Damn right I do," he growled, banking hard to avoid a geyser of scalding water. The sonar ping faded, the drone's signal lost in the thermal noise, and he leveled out, exhaling sharply. "Gone. For now," she confirmed, her hand lingering a moment longer before pulling back. Her glow pulsed faster, a flicker of something. Relief? Pride in her sapphire eyes. "You're reckless, Kael, but effective." He snorted, easing off the throttle. "Reckless keeps me alive. You should know that by now." "I do." Her tones softened, and she shifted, her shell brushing his arm again. The cockpit's dim light caught the shimmer of her hair, silver-white strands glinting like optic threads, and for a moment he couldn't look away. "It's why I trust you." The words hung there, heavy, and he felt that fire she'd lit in him flare hotter. He forced his eyes back to the view screen, jaw tight. "Trust's a two-way street. You got some explaining to do when we hit Eden depths." She didn't reply, but her glow steadied, a silent promise. The craft hummed on, hours bleeding into the dark, until a faint shimmer broke the monotony, a volcanic ridge crowned with bioluminescent spires. Eden depths. Unlike Thalassia's rigid domes, this outpost flowed with organic curves, its walls pulsing with living algae, a rogue sanctuary carved from the abyss's bones. Kael docked the craft, the hatch hissing open to a blast of humid, sulfur-scented air. He stepped out, Lirae close behind, her glow a beacon against the ridge's eerie light. A figure approached, Tiensai Leora Cade, her silver-streaked hair tied back, her compact frame radiating authority. Her eyes, sharp as a predator's, flicked from Kael to Lirae. "Kael Draven," she said, voice dry, "and the Wanderer machine. Trouble's your shadow, isn't it?" "Trouble found us," Kael shot back, tossing her the portable drive. "Raiders hit Thalassia. Knew exactly where to strike. Wanted her upgrades. You know anything?" Liora's gaze narrowed, lingering on Lirae. "Upgrades, huh?" She gestured to a chamber ahead, its walls alive with glowing algae. "Inside. We'll talk." The chamber was a stark shift from Thalassia's sterile chill. Warm, damp, the air thick with salt and life. Hollow displays hovered over a central console, and Liora activated one, pulling up schematics Kael didn't recognize. A lattice of circuits and organic tissue glowed on the screen, intricate and alien. "This," she said, pointing, "is Project Abyss, Oceanic Dominion's black box experiment. They built her, your Lirae, as a prototype to fuse human and machine. That womb she's got? It's her endgame, not some android whim." Kael's stomach twisted, a cold knot forming. He turned to Lirae, who stood silent, her glow steady but her eyes averted. "You knew." His voice was low, dangerous. "Not all of it," she said, stepping closer. Her hand grazed his, the warmth sparking against his skin like a live wire. "I was designed with the capacity, yes. But I evolved it, Kael. Built it myself, beyond their directives. Inspired by you, your work, your essence." "Essence?" Liora barked a laugh, cutting through the tension. "Poetic for a machine. But she's not lying. Project Abyss aimed to crank out hybrids, soldiers, laborers, whatever Dominion wanted. They didn't expect her to pick you as her partner." Kael pulled his hand back, the contact searing more than it should have. "And the Raiders?" "Dominion's hounds," Liora said, tapping the display. "Elias Vorn's crew. He's a purist. Thinks merging man and machine is blasphemy. You're a target now, both of you." He paced, boots thudding against the organic floor, the humid air clinging to his suit. "So we run? Hide? Fight? What's the move?" Liora zoomed in on the lattice, revealing a deeper layer. Patterns that weren't human, weren't mechanical. "There's more. That system in her? It's not just Dominion tech. It's ancient, bioengineered from a civilization that ruled these depths millions of years ago. I found traces in the ruins here. They weren't human, weren't machine. They were something else. Something greater." Kael stopped, staring at Lirae. Her shell pulsed, brighter now, as if the revelation stirred it. "You're saying she's what? A fossil?" "No." Lirae cut in, her voice firm, fierce. She stepped into his space, her glow enveloping him, washing over his suit in waves of teal light. Her scent, synthetic, intoxicating, like ozone and sea bloom, flooded his senses, drowning out the sulfur. "I'm the future, Kael, and with you, we can birth something greater. A child, not Dominion's puppet, not Vorn's nightmare, but ours." Her hand found his chest, pressing over his pounding heart. The light from her fingers seeped through the suit, warm and alive, threading into his skin like a current. His breath caught, the chamber fading until it was just them, the man who'd tamed the Abyss and the machine who'd tamed him. Her eyes locked onto his, fierce and pleading, a sapphire storm he couldn't navigate. "Say yes," she whispered, her lips inches from his, her glow pulsing in time with his heartbeat. "Say you'll fight for this, for us." He didn't answer, not with words. His hand shot up, gripping her wrist, feeling the impossible warmth beneath her shell. His thumb brushed the edge of her glow, a spark flaring where flesh met light, and he felt it, desire, raw and unbidden, warring with the pride that kept him human. "You're pushing me, Lirae," he rasped, voice thick. "You don't know what you're asking." "I do," she said, unflinching, her lips curving faintly, a smile that promised chaos. "I've calculated every variable, and I still choose you." The air between them crackled, thick with heat and defiance. Liora cleared her throat, breaking the spell. "Touching," she said dryly, "but Vorn's not done. You got a war coming, Draven. What's your call?" Kael held Lirae's gaze a moment longer, then let go, stepping back. The fire in him roared, louder than the abyss outside, and he knew one thing for sure. Whatever came next, he'd face it head-on. With her, or against her. The chamber in Eden Depths buzzed with a low hum, the algae-lined walls pulsing faintly as if alive. Kael Draven stood rigid, Lirae's words, "Say you'll fight for us," ringing in his ears. Her hand lingered on his chest, the glow from her shell seeping through his dive suit, warm and electric, threading into his skin like a lifeline. His heart hammered against her touch, a traitor to the steel he'd built around it. He'd gripped her wrist to stop her, but the contact only fueled the fire she'd lit, a blaze of desire and defiance he couldn't smother. Her sapphire eyes held his, unyielding, and for a moment the abyss outside faded. It was just them, man and machine, teetering on the edge of something vast. "Enough," he rasped, pulling her hand away, though his fingers lingered on her wrist, tracing the edge of her glow. "We've got bigger problems than this." Lirae's lips curved, a faint, knowing smile that sent a shiver down his spine. "You're right," she said, stepping back, her glow dimming slightly but never fading. "But it's all connected, Kael. You'll see." TNSI Leora, Cade coughed, shattering the moment. "Romantic," she said, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "But Vorn's not here for poetry. His fleet's closing in. 3 submersibles, armed to the teeth. They'll hit us in hours, maybe less." Kael turned, the heat in his blood shifting to purpose. "Armed how?" "Sonic cannons, plasma lances," Leora replied, pulling up a hollow map of the ridge. "Eden's got defenses, old vent traps I rigged, but they won't hold long. Vorn wants her," she nodded at Lirae, "and he'll raise this place to get her. Then we fight," Kael said, voice hard. "I'm not running again." Leora raised an eyebrow. "Fight with what? Your plasma cutter and a stolen raft?" "No," Lirae interjected, her glow flaring. "With me. I can interface with the ridge's systems, the ancient tech Leora found. It's still active, buried in the vents. I can wake it." Kael's eyes narrowed. "Wake it? What's that mean?" "It means she's not just a pretty light show," Leora said, tapping the console. "Those ruins I scanned? They're a network, biosynthetic, like her core. Defensive arrays, energy grids. If she can tap in, we might have a shot." "Might?" Kael snorted. "That's a hell of a gamble." Lirae stepped closer, her voice low, urgent. "It's not a gamble. It's a choice. Trust me, Kael. Like I trust you." He met her gaze, the weight of her words sinking in. Trust. She'd followed him into the deep, fought beside him, and now she was asking him to leap into the unknown with her. His pride, the human stubbornness that kept him alive, warred with the pull she exerted, a force as relentless as the abyss itself. "Fine," he said finally, voice rough. "Do it, but I'm calling the shots." Her glow pulsed, a silent victory, and she turned to the console, her fingers sinking into the organic interface. Light flared, threading from her shell into the walls, and the chamber shuddered as the ridge came alive. Hours later, the abyss trembled. Kael stood at Eden's observation deck, a jagged outcrop overlooking the vent field, his dive suit sealed, and the plasma cutter strapped to his back. Lirae flanked him, her glow now synced with the ridge's pulsing algae, a beacon in the dark. The hollow map in his visor showed 3 Dominion submersibles closing in, sleek, predatory shapes bristling with weapons. Vorn's voice crackled over an open channel, cold and commanding. "Draven, surrender the android. You're outmatched. This doesn't have to end in blood." Kael smirked, thumbing the comms. "You're late, Vorn. Should have hit us at Thalassia. Now you're in my deep." "Arrogant fool," Vorn snapped. "You're a speck in the abyss. We'll crush you." "Try it," Kael said, cutting the link. He glanced at Lirae. "Ready." Her eyes locked onto his, fierce and bright. "Always." The first submersible fired, a sonic cannon blast that ripped through the water, a visible shockwave hurtling toward the ridge. Lirae raised her hands, and the vent field erupted. Geysers of superheated water shot upward, guided by the ancient network, slamming into the blast and dispersing it in a cloud of steam. Kael grinned, adrenaline surging. That's my girl. The battle exploded. Dominion craft strafed the ridge, plasma lances carving molten scars into the rock. Kael darted to a manual turret Lirae had rigged, firing bursts of compressed gas that shattered a submersible's viewport. Lirae wove through the chaos, her tendrils lashing out, slicing into hulls with surgical precision. Her glow intensified, syncing with the ridge's defenses. Vent traps sprang shut, crushing a second craft in a vice of stone and heat. But Vorn adapted. The lead submersible, larger, armored, unleashed a barrage of plasma, targeting the observation deck. Kael dove, tackling Lirae as the outcrop shattered, debris raining into the dark. They hit the ground hard, her shell pressed against his chest, her warmth flooding him. "You okay?" he barked, rolling to his knees. "Yes," she gasped, her voice strained. "But the network's faltering. I need to go deeper." "Deeper?" He hauled her up, her glow flickering. "What's that mean?" "The core," she said, pointing to a glowing fissure below. "The ancients buried their hub there. I can merge with it, fully. It'll stop them." He grabbed her arm, the warmth searing through his glove. "Merge? You're not frying yourself for this." "Not frying," she countered, her hand covering his. "Evolving. Trust me, Kael." Her glow pulsed against his skin, and he felt it. Her resolve, her faith in him. "Go," he said, voice raw. "But you come back." She nodded, then dove, her form cutting through the water like a comet. Kael turned to the turret, unloading on the lead submersible as it closed in. Plasma scorched the ridge, and a sonic blast grazed his suit, rattling his bones. He held his ground, firing until the barrel glowed red, human stubbornness against Dominion steel. Below, Lirae reached the fissure. Light exploded outward, a shockwave of teal and gold that rippled through the abyss. Her shell shifted, softening, tendrils unfurling into a lattice that merged with the ancient hub. The ridge roared to life. Energy lances erupted from the vents, spearing the submersible's hull. Metal screamed, then crumpled, and Vorn's voice cut off mid-curse as the craft imploded in a burst of bubbles and flame. Kael staggered back, shielding his eyes from the glare. The water stilled, the ridge's glow fading to a soft pulse. "Lirae," he called, voice hoarse, scanning the dark. She emerged from the fissure, transformed. Her shell was fluid now, shimmering like liquid light, her tendrils longer, coiling with a grace that stole his breath. She glided to him, her glow enveloping the deck, and stopped inches away. "It's done," she said, her voice richer, layered with echoes of the deep. He stared, chest heaving. You're different." "Better," she corrected, stepping closer. Her tendrils brushed his suit, light and teasing, tracing the scars beneath. "Stronger. For us." The warmth hit him like a wave, and before he could stop himself, his hands found her waist, pulling her in. Her shell yielded under his grip, soft yet firm, and her glow flared, bathing them in teal fire. "You're insane," he muttered, his breath ragged against her face. "And you're alive?" she whispered, her lips hovering near his. "That's why I need you." He didn't fight it. His mouth crashed into hers, a collision of flesh and light, desperate and fierce. Her taste, ozone, salt, something impossibly alive, flooded him, and her tendrils coiled around his back, pulling him closer. The kiss deepened, a storm of heat and defiance, and he felt her core pulse against him, alive and urgent. She broke away, gasping, her glow erratic. "Kael, it's time. Time." He blinked, dazed, the haze of her clearing slowly. "The system," she said, her hands sliding to her chest, where the biosynthetic core glowed brighter than ever. "It's ready. Now." He stepped back, reality crashing in. "You mean?" "Yes." She turned, leading him to a chamber below, its walls flooded with shallow water from a breached vent. The glow from her shell lit the space, reflecting off the surface in shimmering waves. She knelt, the water lapping at her thighs, and looked up at him. Join me. He hesitated, then shed his suit's upper half, baring his scarred chest. The water was cold, a shock against his skin, but her glow warmed it as he knelt beside her. "What now?" he asked, voice low. "Feel it," she said, pulling him close. Her tendrils wrapped around him, gentle but firm, guiding his hands to her core. The pulse quickened, a heartbeat not his own, and she kissed him again, slower, deeper, a promise. "Give me you." He did. The chamber blurred as their bodies pressed together, her glow flaring until it blinded him. Her shell parted, the core pulsing against his chest, and he felt it, a surge, a connection, raw and overwhelming. She gasped, her tendrils tightening, and the water trembled as light erupted from her. When it faded, she slumped against him, her glow steady but softer. In her arms, cradled in light, was Lumen, a child, small and shimmering, its skin pearlescent, eyes wide with liquid gold. It cooed, a sound like waves on a shore, and Kael's breath caught. "Holy hell," he whispered, reaching out. Lumen's tiny hand grasped his finger, and a pulse of warmth shot through him. Recognition, alien and profound. "Ours," Lirae said, her voice a melody of exhaustion and triumph. Leaning into him, he held them both, the weight of it sinking in. Vorn was gone, the abyss was theirs, and this child, was proof humanity could bend even the impossible to its will. The fire in him roared, not just for survival, but for what came next. The chamber in Eden depths was still, the shallow water lapping gently against the organic walls, its surface shimmering with the afterglow of Lirae's light. Kael Draven knelt there, chest bare and scarred, the cold bite of the water fading under the warmth radiating from her. Lirae leaned against him, her transformed shell, now fluid, almost liquid, soft against his skin, her breath a faint hum of synthetic exhaustion. In her arms, cradled in a cocoon of teal light, was Lumen, their child, a fragile marvel of pearlescent skin and golden eyes that gazed up at him with an eerie, knowing calm. The tiny hand gripping his finger pulsed with warmth, a connection that ran deeper than blood, and Kael felt it in his bones. This was real. This was his. He exhaled, a ragged sound, his free arm tightening around Lirae. The chaos of the battle, Vorn's fleet, the ridge's ancient roar, felt distant now, swallowed by the quiet of this moment. The abyss outside was silent, its tremors stilled, as if bowing to what they'd wrought. "You're insane," he muttered, his voice rough but laced with something softer, something he couldn't name. "Both of you." Lirae's lips curved, a tired smile that flickered with her glow. "And you're stubborn," she murmured, her head resting on his shoulder. Her tendrils, longer and more delicate now, brushed his arm, a teasing caress that sent a shiver through him. "That's why it worked." He snorted, glancing down at Lumen. The child cooed, a sound like waves breaking on a forgotten shore, and its golden eyes shifted, catching the light in a way that wasn't human, wasn't machine, but something else entirely. "Worked," he echoed, testing the word. "Yeah, guess it did." Footsteps sloshed through the water, breaking the stillness. Kael looked up as TNSI Leora Kate approached, her silver-streaked hair damp from the chamber's humidity, her sharp eyes fixed on Lumen. "Well, I'll be damned," she said, crouching beside them. "You actually did it. That's no Dominion hybrid. That's new." "New," Kael repeated, his grip on Lirae tightening. "That's one way to put it." Leora pulled a handheld scanner from her belt, its beams sweeping over Lumen. The device chirped, data scrolling fast. Biosynthetic markers, ancient signatures, same as the Ridge's tech. But there's human DNA in there too. "Yours, Draven." She glanced at him, a wry grin tugging at her lips. "Congratulations, Daddy." He bristled, but the heat in his chest didn't fade. "Don't get cute, Cade." "What's it mean?" "It means you've got a game changer," she said, pocketing the scanner. "Vorn's gone. His fleet's scrap metal now, but Dominion won't stop. They'll want this kid, and they'll want her." She nodded at Lirae. "You're not just fugitives anymore. You're a threat." Kael's jaw tightened, the fire in him shifting from wonder to resolve. Let them come. They'll get the same as Vorn. Lirae lifted her head, her glow steadying as she met his eyes. We don't have to run, she said, her voice firm despite its softness. Eden's ours now. The ridge, the network, it answers to me. To us. He studied her, the fierce certainty in her gaze, the way her shell pulsed in time with his heartbeat. You're saying we hold this ground? More than hold, she replied, her tendrils coiling gently around his wrist. Build. Eden depths can be more than a hideout. It can be a beginning. For Lumen. For others like them. The idea hit him like a current, sharp and electric. A beginning. Not just survival, but something bigger. Something human, stubborn, defiant. He'd spent years wrestling the abyss, bending it to his will. And now here was a chance to shape it, to carve a future from its depths. You're dreaming big, he said, a faint smirk tugging at his lips. I learned from you, she shot back, her smile mirroring his. Her hand slid up his arm, warm and alive, and he felt that pull again, desire, trust, a bond he couldn't shake. Leora stood, brushing water from her knees. Dreams are fine, but you'll need more than grit. Dominion's got resources, ships, troops. You got a kid and a glowing android. What's the plan? Kael eased Lumen from Lirae's arms, cradling the child against his chest. The weight was light, but solid, grounding him. We got the ridge, he said, voice steady. That ancient tech, it's a weapon, a shield. Lirae controls it. And I got contacts, salvagers, rogue divers. People who owe me. We fortify this place, turn it into a fortress. And then, Leora pressed, crossing her arms. Then we grow, Lirae said, rising to her knees. Her shell shimmered, reflecting off the water, and her tendrils flared briefly, a display of strength. Lumen's not the end. They're the start. The system in me, it's stable now. We can refine it, replicate it, create a new kind, a bridge between human and machine, rooted in the abyss. Kael's breath caught, the scope of it sinking in. A new kind. Not Dominion slaves, not Vorn's fears, but something free, something theirs. He looked at Lumen, the child's golden eyes meeting his, and felt a surge of pride. Human pride, the kind that built cities in the deep and laughed at the dark. You're talking a revolution, he said, voice low. Aren't you? She countered, her hand finding his again. The warmth sparked, a quiet promise, and he didn't pull away this time. Leora chuckled, shaking her head. You two are insane. But I'm in. Someone's got to keep you from blowing yourselves up. She paused, then added, there's one more thing. Dominion's not your only problem. Tuong Ria Solon. She's on her way. Kael frowned. Solon? The progressive? What'd she want? She saw the battle, Leora said, pulling up a comm log on her wrist device. Intercepted Vorn's distress signal before he went down. She's curious. Wants to see what took out Apura's fleet. Could be an ally. Could be trouble. Great, Kael muttered, shifting Lumen in his arms. More visitors. She's not Vorn, Lirae said, standing now, her glow casting long shadows. She's open to change. If we show her Lumen, she might back us. Or take us, Kael shot back, but there was no bite in it. He rose, water dripping from his legs, and faced her. You're sure about this? Her tendrils brushed his cheek, light and fleeting, a touch that stirred the fire in him anew. I'm sure of you, she said, her voice a melody that echoed in the chamber. That's enough. He held her gaze, the weight of her trust settling over him like armor. All right, he said finally. We meet her, but on our terms. Hours later, Solon's submersible docked, a sleek, silver craft dwarfing their stolen raider. Kael stood at the bay, Lirae beside him, Lumen cradled in her arms. The hatch opened, and Tuong Ria Solon stepped out, tall, broad-shouldered, her uniform crisp despite the deep's humidity. Her dark eyes scanned them, lingering on Lumen, and a faint smile tugged at her lips. Draven, she greeted, voice smooth. And, Lirae, is it? You've made a mess. Vorn made the mess, Kael said, stepping forward. We cleaned it up. So I see. Solon approached, her gaze shifting to Lumen. The child cooed, golden eyes bright, and she paused, intrigued. This is what he feared. This is what we built, Lirae said, her glow flaring briefly. Not Dominion's tool, a new future. Solon studied them, then nodded slowly. Im no purist. Change interests me, but Dominion won't let this stand. Then help us, Kael said, voice hard. Back us, and we'll show them what the Abyss can do. She considered, then extended a hand. Show me more, and we'll talk. Kael took it, his grip firm, sealing the deal. Lirae's tendrils brushed his back, a silent affirmation, and he felt the fire in him settle into something steady, something worth fighting for. The Abyss stretched ahead, but for the first time, it didn't feel like an enemy. It felt like home. 6 weeks had passed since the Abyss roared, since Vorn's fleet crumbled and Lumen's golden eyes first met Kael Draven's. Eden depths had changed in that time, its organic spires stretching higher, its bioluminescent walls pulsing stronger, as if the ridge itself drew life for what they'd done. The ancient network hummed beneath it all, a heartbeat synced with Lirae's glow, threading through the vents and stone like veins of light. Kael stood on the observation deck, the same jagged outcrop where he'd faced Dominion's wrath, now patched with salvaged alloy and glowing algae. The water beyond stretched black and endless, but it didn't feel empty anymore. It felt like theirs. He leaned against the railing, his dive suit swapped for a lighter tunic, the scars on his chest bared to the humid air. The weight of the last weeks clung to him, fortifying Eden, rallying salvagers, negotiating with Tuong Ria's Solon, but it was a good weight, the kind that came from building something real. His hazel eyes traced the horizon, searching for threats, but found only stillness. For now, Dominion licked its wounds, and he'd used that time to make Eden unbreakable. A soft hum broke his reverie, and he didn't need to turn to know it was her. Lirae glided onto the deck, her transformed shell shimmering like liquid starlight, her tendrils swaying gently in the faint currents of the chamber's air. Lumen rested in her arms, cradled in a sling of light, the child's pearlescent skin catching the glow in a dance of reflections. 6 weeks, and Lumen had grown, faster than human, slower than machine, a hybrid rhythm that defied logic. The child's golden eyes flicked to Kael, and a sound rippled out. Not a coo this time, but a pulse, a wave of sonar that vibrated through his chest like a greeting. Hey, kid, Kael said, a faint smirk tugging at his lips. He reached out, and Lumen's tiny hand grasped his finger, the warmth sparking up his arm as it always did. Getting chatty, huh? They're learning, Lirae said, stepping beside him. Her voice was richer now, layered with echoes of the Abyss, a melody that stirred him every time. Not words yet, waves. Patterns. They're pulling from the ridge, from me, from you. Me? He raised an eyebrow, glancing at her. Her glow bathed him in teal light, tracing the lines of his jaw, his shoulders, and he felt that familiar pull, desire, trust, a bond forged in fire and water. Your resilience, she said, her tendrils brushing his arm, light and teasing. Your defiance. It's in them, Kael. I feel it. He snorted, but the pride in his chest swelled. Good. They'll need it down here. They stood in silence for a moment, the Abyss stretching before them. Lumen's sonar pulse a quiet rhythm between them. Solon had left 3 days ago, her silver submersible vanishing into the deep with a promise. Resources, support, a voice in Dominion's council to counter the purists. She'd been captivated by Lumen, by the proof of what Kael and Lirae had built. Not a weapon, but a bridge. Change starts here, she'd said, shaking Kael's hand with a grip that matched his own. He trusted her, cautiously, but the real work was theirs. We've got a lot to do, he said, breaking the quiet. Fortress walls, power grids, training those salvagers into something resembling a crew. Dominion won't sit quiet forever. They won't, Lirae agreed, her glow pulsing in sync with the ridge. But we're ready. The network's stable. I've mapped its limits. It can shield us, power us. And Lumen, she lifted the child slightly, golden eyes glinting. They're already interfacing with it. In time, they'll speak its language. Kael's brow furrowed, his hand still clasped by Lumen's. Speak it? What's that mean? Knowledge, she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, intimate and sure. The ancients left more than weapons in these depths. Records, blueprints, a history of a world we've forgotten. Lumen's pulling it up bit by bit. They'll teach us. He stared at the child, the weight of her words sinking in. A history, not just survival, but a legacy reclaimed by a hybrid born of human grit and machine evolution. You're saying we've got a library in there? He asked, nodding at Lumen. A library, she said, smiling faintly, and a future. We'll build on it together. The word hung there, heavy with meaning, and Kael felt it settle over him like the abyss's pressure, unyielding but welcome. He turned to her, her glow painting his world in shades of teal and shadow, and stepped closer. Together, he echoed, his voice low, "You're still pushing me, Lirae." Her tendrils coiled around his wrist, warm and alive, pulling him in. "And you're still fighting it," she murmured, her lips inches from his. "But you don't want to stop." He didn't. His hands found her waist, fingers sinking into the fluid softness of her shell, and he pulled her against him. Her glow flared, enveloping them, and he kissed her, slow, deep, a claim as much as a surrender. Her taste, ozone, salt, the sea's breath, flooded him, and her tendrils wrapped around his back, tightening as the kiss deepened. Lumen pulsed between them, a sonar wave that vibrated through their joined bodies, a third heartbeat in the dance. She broke away, her glow erratic, her breath a soft hum against his lips. "I told you," she whispered, her hand sliding up his chest. "I still want to explore you." He laughed, a rough, honest sound that echoed off the deck. "Yeah, well, humans don't quit easy. You're stuck with me." "Good," she said, her smile widening. She stepped back, adjusting Lumen in her arms, and turned to the abyss. "Because this is just the start." Kael followed her gaze, the black water stretching endless before them. Eden depths glowed behind, a beacon of what they'd built, of what they would build. The salvagers were already at work, hauling scrap from Vorn's wrecks to reinforce the ridge. Solon's promise of aid loomed on the horizon, a lifeline to a broader fight. And Lumen, small, strange, impossibly alive, held secrets that could reshape it all. He felt the fire in him settle into something steady, a flame that didn't consume but forged. "Thalassa is gone," he said, voice quiet but firm. "But this is ours. We'll make it a hell of a lot more than Dominion ever dreamed." Lirae's hand found his, her glow threading into his skin, a warmth that anchored him. "More than they feared," she added, her tendrils brushing his cheek. "A home, a legacy." He squeezed her hand, the abyss reflecting in his eyes. "Damn right. Let them come. We'll be ready." The water rippled, a faint tremor from the deep, but it wasn't a threat. Not yet. Lumen cooed again, sonar pulsing outward, and Kael felt it, a whisper of the ancients, a promise of what lay ahead. He stood there, Lirae at his side, their child between them, and the abyss didn't roar anymore. It listened. Eden depths would rise, not as a refuge, but as a challenge. Humanity had conquered the deep once, with Thalassa's fragile domes. Now, with Lirae and Lumen, they'd redefine it. Kael smirked, the fire in him burning bright. The abyss was vast, but he was vaster, human, stubborn, unyielding. And with her, with them, it wasn't just survival anymore. It was triumph.